How's it going?
So, I recently saw the announcement that the Netflix original Death Note movie is getting a sequel. So, of course, in my depression, I went back and rewatched the actually good original series. To those of you that don't know, Death Note is one of those Japanese animes that focuses on the story of Light Yagami, a highly intelligent high school kid who finds the Death Note, a book that kills people if their name is written in it, left by the god of death Ryuk. Light then sets out on a quest to bring true justice and peace to the world, killing criminals anonymously. This leads to him becoming known as the serial killer Kira and a global investigation to begin to discover his identity. This investigation is primarily led by the private investigator L until his, spoiler alert, death, where he is then replaced by his equally gifted protege N. Despite being 10 years old, Death Note remains one of the most highly praised and beloved anime in both Japan and the United States, with praise for its directing, music, plot, and character development. Characters such as Light, L, and Ryuk all consistently rank high in anime character popularity contests because they're damn good characters. Now, as I was rewatching the series, I couldn't help but notice just how well the series represents the four NT or Analyst MBTI types. The four characters I mentioned above, Light, L, N, and Ryuk, all represent one of the four NT types. What makes this series so perfect to analyze from an MBTI perspective is the amount of time the series focuses on character development, and even more importantly, the character's internal monologues, the thoughts of the character. The one exception being Ryuk, as being a god of death, we are denied access to his internal monologue to reflect his otherworldly nature as a god. He also serves as a stand in to the audience. However, he is so core to the story and his character plays so many roles and has so many interactions with the rest of the cast, his personality shines through and he is still able to be analyzed. That being said, we're not going to look at these four characters one at a time and give an in depth analysis in relation to each character's MBTI. These individual analyses will be done in order of appearance in the series. We begin with the Shinigami, or God of Death, Ryuk, who we are introduced to in the opening scene. Ryuk is bored and jaded with the Shinigami world, as all that ever happens there is various SE experiences, the primary given example being gambling. In his boredom, Ryuk drops a death note he stole into the human world for no reason. This is the first indicator of Ryuk being an NT, and more specifically an NTP. Instead of contemplating the consequences or morality of his actions by giving a human being the literal powers of a god, he simply does it just to see what will happen to cure his own boredom. This is an amazing indicator that an individual possesses both NE and TI. Ryuk simply wants to see the cause and effects of his actions. He's performing experiments with humanity being the test subjects. Now, through his introduction, we can conclude that Ryuk is an NTP. However, we have yet to analyze whether he's an extrovert, ENTP, or introvert, INTP. To decide this, we have to analyze Ryuk's interactions with the other characters, which is actually considerably harder than expected, as the only characters that can interact with Ryuk are other gods of death and people who have touched his death note. So, we primarily have to rely on Ryuk's interactions with Light, as Light's possession of the death note and by extension Light himself acts as the independent variable in Ryuk's experiment. And it is through Light that we find Ryuk is a pretty social and outgoing guy. He really likes talking to other people. He follows Lights around whenever he has the opportunity, and often takes the lead in conversation. When he can't follow Light, he is shown to wait for him to return and enthusiastically greets him. At one point, he even asks to play video games with him, saying, "It's been a while," implying he and Light have had these kind of bonding experiences before. Later on in the series, once the Death Note is retrieved by some other characters and Ryuk's identity is revealed to a larger portion of the cast, he always seems happy to finally meet them properly. When he first introduces himself to Light, he seems intimidating, paying no mind to Light's shock at seeing a god of death and begins explaining the Death Note. After this, however, Ryuk adapts his personality to be more considerate of the humans he encounters, always beginning his encounters with some variation of the phrase, "Hiya, my name is Ryuk." In short, Ryuk quickly adapts his actions and interactions to be more welcoming to the humans that he is unfamiliar with. This is a great signifier of Ryuk's FE being tertiary, meaning we can fully identify him as an ENTP. The final evidence comes in the series finale, where Ryuk kills Light by writing Light's name in his own death note. At this point, several years have passed between Light discovering the death note and becoming the world-renowned serial killer Kira. Ryuk has been the only one there with him for the entire time and has served as a friend and confidant to Light on many occasions. Despite all this, after Light is discovered to be Kira, Ryuk kills him without hesitation or sorrow. The only thing that Ryuk says is that now that Light has been caught, the game is once again boring, and that watching Light sit in prison for 40 years would be boring also. So, to save himself the trouble, Ryuk just kills Light. That way he can move on to the next game he wants to play. This signifies not only Ryuk's inferior SI, an inability to appreciate the past and his relationships, but also his blind spot FI, having no moral qualms about killing one of his closest friends in the human world. Ryuk serves as a great example for the chaotic neutral ENTP. Moving on to the second major character introduced in the series, we have Light Yagami, aka the serial killer Kira, who acts as the major focal point of the series, as well as the one who directs the majority of the plot. Light begins the series as nothing more than a highly intelligent high school student who is dissatisfied with the conditions of the world, believing it to lack justice. This belief stems from the morality of his father, a director in the Japanese police force. Through this, we are exposed to Light's FI, although we are as of yet unsure how predominant this FI is within him. Light then discovers the Death Note and, after carefully testing it to determine its validity, begins killing criminals indiscriminately, saying this will bring justice into the world. Again, this reflects his FI, but more importantly, it reflects his NI and TE. Light believes the killing of criminals by an unknown god figure will bring peace in the world through fear and the systematic eradication of criminal action through death. His idea that he will become the god of this new world through this power reflects his NI, his vision of peace and prosperity by his just hand. His NI vision and TE execution is shown in full force here, and quickly shows that his FI morality is just playing a supporting role to his NI vision. So, we established Light Yagami to be an NTJ, but again, we have to ask ourselves whether or not he is an ENTJ or an INTJ. Just as we did with Ryuk, we established this through looking at his tertiary function and the way he behaves around the other characters. It quickly becomes quite apparent that Light suffers from a delusional narcissism. He believes he was chosen to be God by Ryuk giving him the Death Note, despite Ryuk explicitly stating that Light finding the Death Note was completely random and anyone could have found it. He is also shown to be very manipulative with both situations and people, using a girl as a crush on him to lure out an FBI agent that is investigating him, and then using his stalker Misa Amane as a tool to kill L. It is important to note that Light is very charming and seems to take at least some pleasure in the finer things in life. He dresses well, maintains a great social network despite being a serial killer, and cares deeply about how other people feel both about him as well as his persona as Kira. Once Light joins the task force in investigating the Kira case, Light seems to take pleasure in directly participating in the action and events, whether it be flying in on a helicopter or participating in a shootout. Light enjoys the thrill. This is all indicative of his outgoing nature and that his tertiary function is SE, identifying him as an ENTJ. We then come to fan favorite character L. From his introduction, it is apparent L is a recluse. Only his longtime friend, servant, and caregiver Watari has seen his true face or knows his real name. Before we are formally introduced to the character, we see him stage a public announcement where he reveals himself as the head investigator of the Kira case. Kira promptly kills the man on screen, who is then revealed not to be L, but a death row inmate staging an appearance as L. Once we, the audience, are actually introduced to L, we find out just how odd he is, from the way he sits to his addiction to sweets. We also begin to observe his use of TI and the strange way he talks to his fellow investigators, as well as his own personal logic towards the evidence presented to him in the Kira case. We see as he takes one small piece of evidence and deduces a large amount of information from it, such as deducing Kira to be a high school student simply by observing the time of days at which the killings are happening. He also observes each piece of evidence from as many angles as possible, which consistently throws off the rest of the Kira task force. For example, wiretapping and installing hidden cameras into the homes of the task force members. Honestly, I shouldn't even have to justify L as being an INTP because he is a walking stereotype of the personality. His TI and NE are prevalent in all of his actions, and his inferior SE comes forward in all of his social interactions, in both an endearing and awkward way. Finally, we have N, or Nir, one of L's two proteges. He, along with M, take over the Kira investigation after the death of L. Like L, the audience is quickly introduced to Nir's more reclusive nature, sitting amongst his toys, only speaking when he has discovered a new piece of information. Unlike L, Nir lacks many of the strange quirks that can be related to L's NE. As a character, Nir is much more composed and collected in his investigations than his mentor. With L, we see every possible angle of the evidence explored. With Nir, it is the opposite. Whenever Nir observes evidence, it is in a direct, conclusive way. L's investigative style is best described as deductive, or a broad scope focused to a final answer, while Nir's investigation is best described as inductive, working from the final answer backwards into the broad, which is reflective of NI being Nir's leading function. His TE comes down the systematic way he dissects the Kira case. Working for the United States halfway across the world, Nir uses surveillance systems in his own task force to gather information about both Light as well as his accomplices. His FI is present in his desire to work with his fellow L protege Mello to crack the Kira case, as that is what L would have wanted. This is in contrast to Mello, who, being an ESTP, wanted to gain the title of L successor for himself, driven by his tertiary FE. His inferior SE is apparent in the way he avoids physically inserting himself into any of the conflict, remaining in the United States during the majority of the investigation. He only physically reveals himself to Light after he has already confirmed Light is Kira and the Death Note is no longer in his possession. Just as L is the quintessential INTP investigator, N serves as the quintessential INTJ mastermind, putting all of his pieces into place to win the game. This is conveniently reflected in his toy collection and various games he plays while investigating. Now that we have a description of the four types present in the series, let's talk briefly about their interactions between these NT types and how they are reflective of the common real-life relationships. Since Light serves as the main character, most of the interactions revolve around him and his actions, and we are lucky enough to have huge amounts of dialogue between Light and Ryuk, as well as Light and L. Light, the ENTJ, sees Ryuk, the ENTP, as a great resource and asset to his NI goals. This knowledge that Ryuk possesses, as well as Ryuk's insight on the situation, serves Light on multiple occasions throughout the series. Light often looks to Ryuk as the person he can bounce his ideas and plans off of, as Ryuk serves as a relaxed but informed companion. On the flip side of the relationship, Ryuk sees Light as a walking case study. Light serves as Ryuk's interest brought into reality. Throughout the entire series, there is a theme of Light referring to humans, and more specifically to Light, as interesting. To Ryuk, Light is a stimulus that engages both NE, TI, and even his FE. Moving on to Light and L, or the ENTJ-INTP dynamic, both Light and L view each other as intellectual adversaries, constantly trying to one-up and beat each other in the Kira investigation. Light openly shows fear that L's raw intellect will propel him to discovering the truth of Kira's identity, while L is constantly analyzing Light and the situations that Light is manipulating to find the true answer. In short, the TE Dom fears the raw intellectual and processing power of the TI Dom. However, the TI Dom is so lost within itself that it finds difficulty in fully understanding TE execution in the real world. This can be well observed in the interactions between Light and L while they are attending to college together. That is not to say that TI is smarter than TE. Both Light and L received perfect scores on the national exams, showing them to be highly intelligent people. It is to say that TI's strengths lies in analysis and understanding, while TE's strengths lie in execution and construction. Also, neither TI and TE are inherently smarter than FI and FE, although TI and TE users tend to be more interested in academic and knowledge-related pursuits. We're also lucky enough to see a few short interactions between L and Ryuk. The two seem to get along well and enjoy asking each other questions about their respective lives, worlds, and cultures, both doing so simply because they find it interesting. NETI friendships for life. While the INTJ-INTP and INTJ-ENTP relationships are never actually explored, due to Nier spending much of his screen time in the US away from the rest of the cast, we do see signs of respect and friendliness between the types. However, Light does interact with Nier to some degree, and in a large portion of the final episode. Light, the ENTJ, looks down on the INTJ Nier, viewing him as simply an inferior L. Since Light viewed L as his equal, this means by extension, Light views Nier as an inferior to himself. This results in Light loudly and boldly exclaiming his own victory over Nier prematurely, while Nier sits quietly, calmly explaining that everyone is fine and that he has won. Light is shocked when Nier does indeed prove to be successful, stealing the Death Note and proving Light to be Kira, which then climaxes in Light's death. I commonly see this in the relationship not just between ENTJ and INTJ, but most sister types. The extroverted counterpart will view themselves as superior to their introverted sister, as their accomplishments and progress are more widely recognized by themselves and those around them. They tend to lack the internal awareness of the introvert, and therefore are unable to recognize the introvert's own methods and ways of finding success. But yeah, that's Death Note and MBTI. Hope you liked the video. Like, subscribe, comment how great I am, comment how awful I am. I don't care. Bye.